The rain-soaked waitress had no idea that defending a bruised stranger from a corrupt cop would drag her into the deadliest love triangle Chicago had ever seen. Nina Torres thought she was just being kind when she lied to Detective Kane about the mysterious man in the corner booth. But that man was Luca Romano, a grief-shattered mafia boss with a price on his head and vengeance burning in his heart. What started as a simple act of compassion would soon have Nina running for her life, her mute 7-year-old brother clutched in her arms, as bullets shattered her world and forced her to choose between the safety she'd always craved and a love so dangerous it could destroy them all. But when the enemy comes for the child she'd die to protect, Nina will discover that sometimes the most broken men make the fiercest guardians, and that love born in violence can bloom into something beautiful enough to heal even the deepest scars. The question isn't whether she'll survive Luca's world, it's whether she'll want to leave it. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this story of forbidden love and second chances is about to prove that sometimes salvation comes wearing a 3-piece suit and carrying a loaded gun. The rain hammered Chicago's cracked sidewalks like angry fists. Nina Torres pulled her thin jacket tighter as she hurried through the empty streets. Her sneakers splashed through puddles, soaking her socks. She checked her phone again. 5:47 a.m. She was going to be late. Again. Her heart raced as she climbed the steps to Mrs. Chen's apartment building. The old woman was already waiting by her door in a faded bathrobe, arms crossed. "You're 7 minutes late," Mrs. Chen said. "I know. I'm sorry. The bus... Matteo's been awake for an hour. He won't eat his cereal." Nina's stomach twisted. Her little brother had been having nightmares again. She could see it in Mrs. Chen's tired eyes. Matteo was hard work, and Nina knew she was asking too much of the elderly woman. "I'll talk to him," Nina said softly. She found Matteo sitting on the couch, his dark hair messy from sleep. He was 7 years old but looked smaller, his thin shoulders hunched forward. When he saw Nina, his face lit up for just a moment before he remembered to be upset. "Hey, buddy." Nina knelt in front of him. "Mrs. Chen says you won't eat breakfast." Matteo shook his head. He hadn't spoken a word in 8 months. Not since the night their parents died in the car accident that changed everything. "I know you're mad at me for leaving early again," Nina said, "but I promise I'll be home tonight. We'll make those frozen pizzas you like, okay?" Matteo nodded slowly. Nina kissed his forehead and handed Mrs. Chen $40 from her tips. It was almost all she had left. "I'll pick him up after school," Nina said. Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "You're a good sister, Nina. But you can't keep doing this alone." Nina forced a smile. "I'm not alone. I have him." The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. Nina tied her apron strings and grabbed the coffee pot, ready to start another long day. The breakfast rush was always the worst. Angry commuters wanting their eggs perfect and their coffee hot. "Torres!" her boss, Mr. Kowalski, shouted from behind the counter. His round face was red with anger. "You're 15 minutes late." "I'm sorry, Mr. K. It won't happen again." "That's what you said last week." He wiped his sweaty forehead with a dirty towel. "Sarah called in sick, so you're covering her tables too." Nina's heart sank. Sarah's section was twice the size of hers. She'd be running all day, but she needed this job. It was the only thing keeping a roof over Matteo's head. "No problem," she said. The morning flew by in a blur of orders and complaints. Nina's feet ached in her old shoes. She refilled coffee cups, cleared tables, and smiled even when customers were rude. By 10 o'clock, the breakfast crowd had thinned out. That's when she noticed him. A man sat alone in the back corner booth, his face hidden in shadows. He wore a black jacket with the hood pulled up, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug like he was trying to warm himself. There was something about the way he sat, perfectly still, watching, that made Nina's skin prickle. She approached his table carefully. "Can I get you anything to eat?" He looked up, and Nina's breath caught. Even in the dim light, she could see the bruises. A purple mark spread across his left cheekbone. His lip was split, but his eyes, dark brown and intense, held hers with a steady gaze. "Just coffee," he said quietly. His voice was rough, like he'd been shouting or hadn't spoken in days. "You sure? We have good pancakes." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Coffee's fine." Nina filled his cup and tried not to stare at the cuts on his knuckles. He'd been in a fight. A bad one. She should mind her own business. She had enough problems without getting involved with dangerous strangers, but something about him seemed lost. The way he hunched over his coffee reminded her of Matteo after a bad dream. The bell above the door chimed. Nina looked up and froze. Detective Riley Kane walked in, his cold eyes scanning the diner. He was a big man with graying hair and a permanent scowl. Nina had seen him around the neighborhood, asking questions, making people nervous. There were rumors about Kane, that he worked for people who weren't police. Kane's gaze stopped on the man in the corner booth. His hand moved to his hip, where Nina knew he kept his gun. "Can I help you, Detective?" Nina asked quickly, stepping between Kane and the stranger. "Just coffee," Kane said, but he didn't sit down. He walked slowly toward the back booth. Nina's heart pounded. The diner went quiet. Even Mr. Kowalski stopped clattering pans in the kitchen. The stranger's body tensed, his hands flat on the table. "You," Kane said, stopping beside the booth. "Let me see some ID." The stranger looked up calmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." "I'll be the judge of that. ID, now." Nina saw the stranger's jaw tighten. His hands stayed perfectly still, but she could feel the danger radiating from him like heat from a fire. Whatever was about to happen would be bad for everyone. Before she could think, Nina stepped forward. "Hey, Cousin Eddie," she said brightly. "I didn't expect to see you today." Both men stared at her. Kane's eyes narrowed. "Cousin?" "Yeah, this is my cousin from Detroit. He's visiting for a few days." The lie rolled off her tongue easily. "He's been telling me about his new job at the, car factory." The stranger played along perfectly. "Nice to see you too, cuz." His voice was steady, but Nina saw gratitude flicker in his dark eyes. Kane looked between them suspiciously. "What car factory?" Nina's mind went blank. She could feel sweat beading on her forehead. "The Ford one?" "Detroit's full of car factories," the stranger said smoothly. "I work assembly line, third shift. That's why I look so beat up. Long hours, you know." Kane stared at him for a long moment. Nina held her breath. Finally, the detective stepped back. "Enjoy your visit," Kane said, but his tone promised this wasn't over. He bought a coffee to go and left without another word. Nina's legs felt shaky. She looked down at the stranger, who was watching her with those intense brown eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Are you really okay?" Nina asked. "Those bruises look fresh." "I'll be fine. You should put ice on that cut." He touched his split lip carefully. "I'll remember that." Nina wanted to ask more questions, but Mr. Kowalski was already shouting for her to get back to work. She spent the rest of her shift stealing glances at the corner booth, but the stranger had vanished as quietly as he'd come. Her shift finally ended at 9 p.m. Nina's feet screamed with every step as she walked to the bus stop. The streets were nearly empty, lit by flickering streetlights that cast long shadows. She was digging for bus fare when she heard the footsteps behind her, heavy boots on wet pavement, getting closer. Nina's blood turned cold. She turned around slowly and saw a figure in a dark hoodie following her. His face was hidden, but something about the way he moved made every instinct scream danger. She walked faster. The footsteps matched her pace. Nina's heart hammered against her ribs. The bus stop was still 2 blocks away. Too far. She ducked into an alley, hoping to lose him, but the footsteps followed. "Hey," a rough voice called. "Wait up." Nina broke into a run. Her purse bounced against her hip as her sneakers slapped against wet concrete. She could hear him gaining on her. She was almost to the street when a strong hand grabbed her shoulder. "I said wait." The hand suddenly vanished. Nina spun around and saw the hooded man backing away, his eyes wide with fear. Standing behind him, silent as a shadow, was the stranger from the diner. "Walk away," the stranger said quietly. "Hey, man, I was just—" "Walk away." The hooded man looked between them, then turned and ran. His footsteps echoed off the alley walls until they faded into nothing. Nina pressed her back against the brick wall, breathing hard. The stranger turned to her, and in the dim streetlight she could see concern in his bruised face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Nina shook her head. Where did you come from?" "I was walking." He glanced down the alley where her attacker had fled. "This isn't a safe neighborhood, especially not alone at night." "I know that. I don't have a choice." Something shifted in his expression. "Everyone has choices." "Not everyone." Nina pulled her jacket tighter. "Some of us just try to survive." He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The bus comes in 10 minutes. I'll wait with you." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." They walked to the bus stop in silence. Nina snuck glances at him, trying to figure out who he was. The expensive jacket, the confident way he'd scared off her attacker, the careful way he watched everyone who passed. "What's your real name?" she asked quietly. "Does it matter?" "I guess not. I'm Nina, though. Nina Torres." "Thank you for today, Nina Torres." The bus pulled up with a wheeze of air brakes. Nina climbed the steps and found a seat by the window. When she looked back, the stranger was gone. Nina unlocked her apartment door and stepped into the tiny living room. Mrs. Chen was asleep in the recliner with Matteo curled up next to her. The TV played an old movie with the sound turned low. "Mrs. Chen," Nina whispered, gently shaking her shoulder. The older woman woke with a start. "Oh, Nina, I must have dozed off." "It's okay. Thank you for staying with him." Mrs. Chen gathered her things. "He ate his dinner, but no homework. He just wanted to wait for you." Guilt twisted in Nina's stomach. Matteo had been through enough. He deserved better than a sister who was never around. After Mrs. Chen left, Nina carried Matteo to his bed. He barely stirred as she tucked him under his superhero blanket. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I love you, buddy." Nina fell into her own bed exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. She kept thinking about the stranger's dark eyes and the way he'd appeared just when she needed help most. Who was he? And why did she feel like their paths would cross again? The next morning, Nina's alarm didn't go off. She woke to sunlight streaming through her thin curtains and panic flooding her chest. Her phone said 7:15 a.m. She was supposed to be at work 15 minutes ago. She threw on yesterday's uniform and ran to Mrs. Chen's apartment. Matteo was still in his pajamas, eating cereal and watching cartoons. "I overslept," Nina said breathlessly. "I figured." Mrs. Chen handed her a cup of coffee. "You look terrible, child." Nina didn't have time to argue. She kissed Matteo goodbye and ran for the bus, her heart sinking with every passing minute. Mr. Kowalski was waiting when she burst through the diner's door. 45 minutes late?" he shouted. "That's a record, even for you." "I'm sorry, Mr. K. My alarm." Save it! You're on thin ice, Torres. One more strike and you're out. Nina bit back tears. She couldn't lose this job. Without it, she and Matteo would be homeless in a month. She tied her apron and got to work, trying to push down the fear that gnawed at her stomach. The morning rush was brutal. Every customer seemed angrier than usual. Coffee was too cold, eggs were too runny, service was too slow. At her lunch break, Nina stumbled to her locker in the back room. Her hands shook as she tried to open the combination lock. When she finally got it open, her breath caught. There was an envelope inside, thick and white, with her name written in neat handwriting across the front. Nina looked around to make sure she was alone, then opened it. Inside was more cash than she'd ever seen at once. 20s and 50s, neatly folded. Her hands trembled as she counted. $800. There was also a note written in the same careful handwriting. You risked yourself for a stranger. That takes courage. Stay safe. Nina's head spun. $800 would pay rent, buy groceries, get Matteo's medication refilled. It would give them breathing room for the first time in months. But who was E? And how had he gotten into her locker? The only person she could think of was the stranger from yesterday. But how would he know where she worked? How would he know she needed money? Nina folded the bills carefully and put them in her purse. Every instinct told her this was dangerous. People didn't just give away money without expecting something in return. But Matteo needed his medicine, and she was tired of choosing between rent and food. Maybe, just this once, she could accept help without asking questions. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Nina kept thinking about the money in her purse and what it meant. Someone was watching her. Someone who had enough cash to casually leave $800 in a stranger's locker. She was wiping down tables when Detective Kane walked in again. Nina's stomach dropped as his cold eyes found hers. "We need to talk," he said. Detective Kane slid into a booth near the window, his bulky frame making the vinyl creak. Nina's hands trembled as she poured his coffee. The money in her purse felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. "Sit," Kane said, nodding to the seat across from him. Nina glanced toward the kitchen. "I'm still working. Sit down." She slid into the booth, her heart hammering. Kane's pale blue eyes studied her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Tell me about your cousin," he said. "My cousin?" "Eddie, from Detroit. The one who works at the car factory." Nina forced herself to meet his gaze. "What about him?" "Funny thing, I called my buddy at Detroit PD, asked him to check the Ford plant employee records." Kane leaned back, a cold smile spreading across his face. "No Eddie Torres. No Torres at all, actually." The blood drained from Nina's face. "Maybe you got the wrong plant." "I checked them all." Kane's voice was quiet, dangerous. "So either your cousin lied about his job or he lied about his name. Which is it?" Nina's mouth went dry. She could feel sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning. "I don't know. Maybe he works somewhere else. We're not that close." "Not close enough to know where he works, but close enough that he visits Chicago?" Kane shook his head. "That doesn't add up, sweetheart." The way he said "sweetheart" made Nina's skin crawl. There was nothing friendly about it. "Look," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I don't know what you want from me. I served a customer coffee. That's it." Kane leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Let me tell you what I think happened. I think you saw a dangerous man being questioned by police, and you decided to help him. Maybe you thought you were being a good Samaritan. Maybe you just don't like cops. That's not... But here's the thing." Kane's voice dropped to a whisper. "The man you helped? He's not some poor victim. He's a killer, Nina. And now he knows who you are. Nina's blood turned to ice. What are you talking about? I'm trying to protect you, but I can only do that if you tell me the truth. Kane reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was sweaty and cold. Where is he? Nina jerked her hand away. I don't know. I haven't seen him since yesterday. Kane stared at her for a long moment, then stood up. He threw a $5 bill on the table. You're playing with fire, little girl. Don't get burned. After he left, Nina sat in the booth with her head in her hands. Her whole body was shaking. A killer. Kane had called the stranger a killer, but Nina remembered the gentle way he'd said thank you, the concern in his eyes when he'd asked if she was hurt. Could she really be that bad at reading people? You okay, honey? Nina looked up to see Dolores, one of the regular customers, standing beside the booth. She was a plump woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair. I'm fine, Nina said quickly. That cop giving you trouble? Dolores glanced toward the door where Kane had disappeared. I seen him around the neighborhood lately, asking questions, making people nervous. You know him? Know of him. Dolores lowered her voice. Word is, he don't always work for the side of the angels, if you know what I mean. Nina's stomach twisted. What do you mean? Just be careful, sweetie. There's people in this city who wear badges but serve different masters. Dolores patted Nina's shoulder. And if someone's bothering you, you got friends here. Don't forget that. The rest of Nina's shift crawled by. Every time the bell above the door chimed, she expected to see Kane or the mysterious stranger. But neither appeared. By closing time, Nina was exhausted. She gathered her things and headed for the bus stop, constantly looking over her shoulder. The streets felt more dangerous now, full of shadows and hidden threats. The ride home seemed to take forever. Nina clutched her purse, thinking about the money inside. $800 that could change everything, or get her killed. When she finally reached her apartment building, she climbed the stairs slowly. Her legs felt like lead. All she wanted was to check on Matteo and collapse into bed. But when she reached her floor, she knew something was wrong. Her apartment door stood slightly open. Nina's heart stopped. She always locked the door. Always. And Mrs. Chen would never leave it open. She pushed the door open slowly, afraid of what she might find. The living room was destroyed. Couch cushions were thrown everywhere. Books scattered across the floor. The TV was knocked over. Its screen cracked. Drawers had been pulled out and dumped, their contents spread like confetti. Matteo! Nina screamed, rushing toward his bedroom. She found him huddled under his bed, his small body shaking. When he saw Nina, he scrambled out and threw himself into her arms. It's okay, baby, Nina whispered, holding him tight. It's okay. I'm here. But it wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. She carried Matteo to the living room and sat on the overturned couch, rocking him gently. His face was pale and streaked with tears, but he didn't make a sound. He never made a sound anymore. Nina's hand shook as she called Mrs. Chen. Are you both all right? Mrs. Chen asked when she heard Nina's voice. Someone broke into our apartment. Did you see anything? Hear anything? I went to the store around 4. When I got back, I heard noises, but I thought it was just you coming home early. Mrs. Chen's voice was shaky. Oh, Nina, I'm so sorry. I should have checked. It's not your fault. Nina looked around at the destruction. Did they take anything? Nina checked carefully, but nothing seemed to be missing. The TV was broken but still there. Her jewelry, what little she had, was scattered but present. Even the emergency cash she kept in her sock drawer was untouched. They hadn't come to steal. They'd come to send a message. That night, Nina couldn't sleep. She'd pushed Matteo's dresser against the front door and checked every window twice. Matteo slept in her bed, curled against her side like he used to do when he was smaller. Every sound made her jump. The building's old pipes groaning, footsteps in the hallway, car doors slamming on the street. Around 3 a.m., she gave up trying to sleep and went to the kitchen for water. That's when she saw it. Written across her bathroom mirror in red lipstick were 4 words that made her blood freeze. "Stay out of this." Nina sank to the floor, her back against the wall. Someone had been in her home while she was at work. They'd terrorized her little brother and destroyed her things. They'd left a message that couldn't be clearer. But stay out of what? All she'd done was lie to a cop to help a stranger. Was that really worth all this? Nina thought about Detective Kane's warning, about the money in her purse, about the way the stranger had appeared from nowhere to save her. Maybe Kane was right. Maybe she was playing with fire. But as she watched Matteo sleep, his face peaceful for the first time all day, Nina made a decision. Whatever was happening, whoever was after her, she wouldn't let them hurt her brother. She'd find a way to protect him, no matter what it cost. The next morning, Nina called in sick to work. She couldn't leave Matteo alone, not after what happened. They spent the day cleaning up the apartment and trying to make it feel safe again. Matteo helped without being asked, picking up his scattered toys and putting them back in his room. He didn't speak, but his dark eyes were watchful, alert. He'd learned too young that the world could be dangerous. By evening, Nina had made a plan. She'd return the money to whoever had left it. She'd stay away from the stranger if she saw him again. She'd keep her head down and focus on taking care of Matteo. But plans, she was about to learn, don't always survive contact with reality. She was making dinner when someone knocked on the door. Nina froze, her hand tightening on the wooden spoon. The knock came again, soft but insistent. "Nina?" A familiar voice called. "It's me." Nina's heart jumped. She recognized that voice. The stranger from the diner. "Go away," she called back. "I know you're scared. I know what happened to your apartment." Nina's blood turned cold. "How do you know that?" "Let me in. Please, we need to talk." "I said go away." Nina's voice cracked. "Leave us alone." There was silence for a moment. Then, "They're not going to stop Nina. The people who did this. They'll keep coming until they get what they want." "What do they want?" "Me." Nina closed her eyes. She'd known this moment would come. The moment when her simple life would collide completely with his dangerous world. "I can protect you," the stranger said quietly. "Both of you. But you have to trust me." Nina looked at Matteo, who was watching her with wide, frightened eyes. She thought about the broken TV and the message on her mirror, about Detective Kane's cold smile and Dolores's warning. She was in this now, whether she wanted to be or not. Nina walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The stranger stood in the hallway, his hands visible and empty. His face was calm, but she could see exhaustion in his posture. Against every instinct that screamed danger, Nina unlocked the door. He stepped inside, and she got her first clear look at him in good light. He was taller than she'd thought, with broad shoulders and strong hands. His dark hair was slightly messy, and the bruises on his face had faded to yellow and green. But it was his eyes that held her. Dark, brown and intense, but not threatening. Sad, maybe. Lonely. He wore a black t-shirt that showed powerful arms and a flat stomach. But as he turned to close the door behind him, Nina saw something that made her gasp. The shirt rode up slightly, revealing the handle of a gun tucked into his waistband. "You're armed," she whispered. He looked down, then carefully lifted the shirt to show her the weapon. Yes, but not for you. He slowly pulled the gun out and set it on the table by the door. Better? Nina stared at the gun. It looked expensive and deadly. Are you really a killer? Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe. Sometimes, he said quietly. When I have to be. The honest answer scared her more than a lie would have, but it also made her trust him somehow. A liar would have denied it. What's your real name? She asked. Luca Romano. And what do you want from me, Luca Romano? He looked past her to where Matteo sat at the kitchen table, watching them with big eyes. When Luca's gaze returned to Nina, she saw something soft and vulnerable there. I want to keep you both safe, he said, and I want you to know that what you did for me, lying to that cop, it meant something. Not many people would have risked themselves for a stranger. Maybe I'm stupid. No, you're brave. There's a difference. Nina felt heat spread through her chest at the compliment. The money in my locker, that was you. Yes. I can't take it. You already did. I mean, I can't keep it. I don't know what strings are attached. Luca's expression hardened slightly. There are no strings. You helped me when you didn't have to. I helped you when you needed it. That's how the world should work. But that's not how your world works, is it? Luca was quiet for a long moment. No, he admitted. In my world, everything has a price. Nothing comes free. Then why? Because you reminded me that there's another way to live. Luca glanced at Matteo again, and his voice softened. How old is he? 7. He hasn't said anything since I got here. He doesn't talk, not since our parents died. Understanding flashed in Luca's eyes. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. Maybe not, but I'm sorry anyway. Luca stepped closer, and Nina could smell his cologne, something expensive and warm. The people who trashed your apartment won't stop coming. They think you know where I am. Do I? A small smile touched his lips. You do now. Despite everything, the fear, the danger, the gun on her table, Nina almost smiled back. There was something about him that made her feel safer, even though he was probably the most dangerous person she'd ever met. Why are they looking for you? She asked. That's complicated. I've got time. Luca glanced around the small apartment, taking in the patched walls and secondhand furniture. This isn't the place for that conversation. There are people who might be listening. A chill ran down Nina's spine. Listening how? Bugs, cameras, people watching from the street. Luca moved to the window and looked out carefully. They've already been inside once. They could have left anything. Nina felt sick. The idea that strangers had been in her home, touching her things, was bad enough. But the thought that they might still be watching? What do you want me to do? She asked. Come with me. Where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't reach you. Nina looked at Matteo, who was still watching them silently. For how long? I don't know. Until this is over. And what if it's never over? Luca's jaw tightened. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. It was crazy, absolutely insane. She was thinking about leaving her home, her job, her life to go with a man she'd known for 2 days. A man who carried a gun and admitted to killing people. But as she looked around her destroyed apartment, Nina realized she didn't have much choice. Someone had already brought the danger to her door. At least with Luca, she might be able to protect Matteo. Okay, she said quietly, but I need to pack some things. Relief flashed across Luca's face. Pack light, just what you need. Nina nodded and started toward her bedroom, but Luca's voice stopped her. "Nina." She turned back. "Thank you," he said, "for trusting me." Nina met his dark eyes and felt something shift inside her chest. Something warm and dangerous. "Don't make me regret it," she said. Nina stuffed clothes into a duffel bag while Matteo sat on his bed, watching. His superhero blanket was clutched in his small hands, his knuckles white with tension. "We're going somewhere safe for a few days," Nina said softly, kneeling in front of him. "Like a vacation." Matteo's dark eyes were full of questions he couldn't ask. Nina's heart broke a little more each time she saw that lost expression on his face. "I know you're scared," she whispered. "I'm scared too. But that man out there, Luca, he's going to help us. Can you be brave for me?" Matteo nodded slowly, then held up his arms. Nina hugged him tight, breathing in his little boy smell of soap and cereal. Whatever happened next, she had to keep him safe. When they returned to the living room, Luca was standing by the window, his phone pressed to his ear. 20 minutes, he said quietly. "Black car. Make sure you're not followed." He hung up and turned to Nina. "My friend is bringing a car. We need to be ready to move fast." "Where are we going?" "My home." Something in the way he said it made Nina's stomach flutter. "And where is that?" "You'll see." Luca picked up his gun and slipped it back under his shirt. The casual way he handled the weapon reminded Nina that she was stepping into a world she didn't understand. They waited by the window, watching the street below. Nina held Matteo's hand while Luca scanned for threats she couldn't see. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The windows were tinted so dark Nina couldn't see inside. "That's us," Luca said. He looked at Nina seriously. "Once we leave here, things change. Are you ready for that?" Nina thought about the message on her mirror, the fear in Matteo's eyes, the money in her purse that represented more hope than she'd had in months. "I'm ready," she said. The ride through Chicago's late-night streets was like entering a different world. The black car was pristine inside, with leather seats that probably cost more than Nina's monthly rent. The man driving introduced himself only as Dom, a big guy with kind eyes and careful hands on the steering wheel. Matteo sat between Nina and Luca, his head resting against Nina's arm. The gentle motion of the car had relaxed him, and his breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of sleep. "He trusts you," Luca said quietly, watching Matteo's peaceful face. "He doesn't have much choice." "We always have choices, even when they're hard ones." Nina looked at Luca's profile in the dim light from the street lamps. "Is that how you justify the things you do?" Luca was quiet for a long moment. "I don't justify them. I just accept the consequences." "That's a lonely way to live." "Yes," Luca said simply. "It is." They drove through neighborhoods Nina had never seen, tree-lined streets with huge houses set back behind iron gates. The city felt different here, quieter, safer. Finally, Dom turned through a set of massive gates that opened automatically. The driveway curved through landscaped grounds before ending at a house that took Nina's breath away. It wasn't just big, it was elegant. 3 stories of cream-colored stone with tall windows and balconies that looked like something from a movie. Warm light spilled from several windows, making the whole place glow against the dark sky. "You live here?" Nina asked. "Yes." "Alone?" Luca's expression tightened slightly. "Yes." Dom parked near the front entrance, where 2 men in dark suits waited. They were clearly security, alert, professional, dangerous. But when they saw Luca, their posture relaxed. "Evening, boss," one of them said as Luca stepped out of the car. Boss. Nina felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Luca gently lifted the sleeping Matteo from the car. The little boy stirred but didn't wake, instinctively curling against Luca's chest. Something about the sight, this dangerous man holding her brother so carefully, made Nina's throat tight. Inside, the house was even more impressive. The foyer had marble floors and a chandelier that cast rainbow patterns on the walls. A curved staircase led to the upper floors, its banister polished to a mirror shine. Maria, Luca called softly. A woman appeared from a side hallway, middle-aged, with graying hair and a kind face. She wore a simple dress and practical shoes, but she carried herself with quiet authority. Mr. Luca, she said warmly, then looked at Nina and Matteo with curious eyes. Maria, this is Nina and Matteo. They'll be staying with us for a while. Maria's expression didn't change, but Nina caught the quick glance she gave Luca. There was a question there, and concern. Of course, Maria said smoothly. Shall I prepare the blue guest rooms? That would be perfect. And maybe some warm milk for the boy when he wakes up? Naturally. Maria studied Matteo's sleeping face with grandmother's eyes. Poor little lamb. He looks exhausted. We all are, Luca said quietly. Maria led them upstairs to a hallway lined with oil paintings and soft carpet that Nina's feet sank into. She opened a door to reveal a bedroom that was bigger than Nina's entire apartment. The bed was king-sized with a cream-colored comforter and more pillows than any one person could need. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking gardens Nina could barely make out in the darkness. There's a connecting door to the boys' room, Maria said, pointing to a door Nina hadn't noticed, and the bathroom is through there. Nina peeked into Matteo's room and nearly gasped. It was clearly meant for a child, with cheerful yellow walls and a bed shaped like a race car. Toys lined the shelves, expensive ones that looked like they'd never been played with. Whose room is this? Nina asked. Luca's expression went carefully blank. No one's. Not anymore. The pain in his voice made Nina want to ask more questions, but something held her back. Whatever story this room told, Luca wasn't ready to share it. Get some rest, Luca said, gently placing Matteo on the race car bed. We'll talk more in the morning. But Nina couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, the whole situation too surreal. She kept thinking about the gun under Luca's shirt and the way his security guards had called him boss. Around midnight, she gave up trying to sleep and wandered out onto the balcony. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of flowers. Below, the garden stretched out like a fairy tale, with pathways lit by soft lamps. She was admiring a fountain when she heard footsteps on the stone balcony next to hers. Luca appeared at the railing of what must be his own room, wearing jeans and nothing else. In the moonlight, Nina could see the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. But it was the scars that caught her attention. Thin white lines across his ribs, a puckered mark on his shoulder that looked like an old bullet wound. Can't sleep either? He asked quietly. It's all a little overwhelming. Luca leaned against the railing, and Nina couldn't help noticing how the moonlight played across his dark hair. I know this isn't what you expected. I didn't know what to expect. Nina wrapped her arms around herself. What am I doing here, Luca? Being safe. But for how long? I can't just disappear from my life forever. Luca was quiet for a moment. Tell me about your life, your real life. So Nina found herself talking about things she rarely shared with anyone. Working double shifts to pay rent, watching Matteo struggle in school because he wouldn't speak to his teachers, the constant fear that child services would decide she wasn't capable of raising him alone. You're 28. Lucas said when she finished. You should be figuring out your own dreams, not raising someone else's child. He's not someone else's child. He's my brother. But he's not your responsibility. Nina turned to face him fully, anger flashing in her chest. Yes, he is. When my parents died, I promised I would take care of him. That's what family does. Something shifted in Luca's expression. Not all families. What happened to yours? Luca looked out over the gardens for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. I was married once. Had a son. Nina's heart clenched. Was. They were killed 3 years ago. Wrong place, wrong time, caught in someone else's war. I'm sorry. Their names were Isabella and Marco. She was a teacher. He was 4 years old and obsessed with dinosaurs. Luca's hands gripped the railing. I wasn't there to protect them. Nina wanted to reach out to him, to offer comfort, but the balcony between them felt like an ocean. The room Matteo's sleeping in, she said quietly, was Marco's. I've never been able to change it. And now? Luca looked at her with eyes full of something she couldn't name. Now there's a little boy sleeping in it again. And for the first time in 3 years, that doesn't feel like it's breaking my heart. The silence stretched between them, heavy with understanding. Nina saw Luca differently now, not just as a dangerous stranger, but as a man carrying grief so deep it had hollowed him out. What business are you in? She asked gently. Luca's mouth curved in a smile that held no humor. The family business, which is protection, import and export, investments. That's a very careful way of not answering my question. Some questions are better left unasked. Nina studied his profile in the moonlight. Are you a good man who does bad things, or a bad man who occasionally does good? I'm a man who tries to protect the people he cares about. Sometimes that requires doing terrible things. And the people who are after us think I have something that belongs to them. Do you? Luca's smile became sharper, more dangerous. That depends on how you define ownership. Nina shivered, though the night wasn't cold. She was getting a glimpse of the man Luca was in his professional life, calculating, ruthless, unforgiving. But when he looked at her, his expression softened. You should try to get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow will be complicated. More complicated than today. Much. Nina started to go back inside, then paused. Luca? Yes? Thank you for bringing us here, for keeping us safe. Thank me when this is over and you're both still alive. The words should have scared her. Instead, Nina found herself thinking about the gentle way Luca had carried Matteo. The pain in his voice when he talked about his lost family, the vulnerability she glimpsed behind his careful control. She was falling for him. It was stupid and dangerous and completely insane, but she couldn't deny the truth any longer. Nina Torres, waitress and guardian, was falling in love with a man who might be her salvation or her destruction, maybe both. The next morning, Nina woke to sunlight streaming through silk curtains and the sound of laughter from somewhere below. Laughter. She hadn't heard Matteo laugh in 8 months. Nina threw on clothes and hurried downstairs, following the sound to a large kitchen that belonged in a magazine. Matteo sat at a massive island, his legs swinging as he ate pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Maria bustled around, clearly enjoying having a child to spoil. But it was the sight of Luca that stopped Nina in her tracks. He sat next to Matteo, his expensive suit jacket draped over a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He was showing Matteo something on his phone, pictures maybe, and pointing at different details. That's a T-Rex, Luca was saying. See the little arms? They look useless, but they were actually very strong. Matteo nodded eagerly, his dark eyes bright with interest. When he saw Nina, he waved her over excitedly. "Good morning," Luca said, standing as she approached. There was something different about him in the morning light, younger, more relaxed. The dangerous edge was still there, but it was muted. "What are you showing him?" Nina asked. "Dinosaur pictures. Maria mentioned he liked them." Nina looked at Maria, who was pretending to be busy at the stove but clearly listening to every word. "You told her about Marco?" Nina said quietly. "Some things are worth sharing." Matteo tugged on Nina's sleeve and pointed at the phone screen. It showed a picture of a massive dinosaur skeleton in what looked like a museum. "That's the Field Museum," Luca said, "here in Chicago. Maybe we could visit sometime." Matteo's face lit up like Christmas morning. He looked at Nina with hope shining in his eyes, the first real hope she'd seen since their parents died. "We'll see," Nina said carefully. But even as she said it, she realized she was already thinking of this as more than a temporary arrangement. She was thinking about tomorrow, next week, next month. She was thinking about Matteo having someone to share his interests with, someone who didn't look at his silence as a problem to be solved. She was thinking about building a life in this beautiful house with this complicated, dangerous, gentle man. And that was the most dangerous thought of all. After breakfast, Luca showed them around the estate. The gardens were even more beautiful in daylight, perfect lawns, flower beds that looked like paintings, paths that wound between old trees and hidden benches. Matteo ran ahead, chasing butterflies and exploring with the fearlessness of childhood. For the first time in months, he looked like a normal 7-year-old. "He's getting his spirit back," Luca observed, watching Matteo climb a small hill toward a gazebo. "Children are resilient," Nina said, "more than adults sometimes." "You think he'll start talking again?" "Maybe, when he feels safe enough." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a rose garden with a white marble bench. Luca sat down and gestured for Nina to join him. "I need to tell you something," he said. Nina's stomach clenched. "That sounds ominous." "The people who are after us, they're not just random criminals. They're family." "Your family?" "My wife's family, the Morettis." Luca's voice was careful, controlled. "When Isabella died, they blamed me. Said I should have protected her better. But it wasn't your fault. Wasn't it?" Luca looked at his hands. "I made choices that put her in danger. I knew the risks of my life, and I married her anyway." Nina studied his profile, seeing the guilt that had been eating at him for 3 years. What do the Morettis want? Revenge, money, power. Luca shrugged. The usual things families fight over when grief turns to anger. And Detective Kane? Works for them, has for years. Nina felt pieces clicking into place. "That's how they knew about me. Kane told them I helped you." "Yes. So this is my fault. If you hadn't lied, Kane would have arrested me or killed me in that diner." Luca turned to face her fully. "You saved my life, Nina. I won't let you be punished for that." "By starting a war?" "By ending one." The quiet certainty in his voice sent chills down Nina's spine. Whatever Luca was planning, it would be final and probably violent. "There has to be another way," she said. "Sometimes there isn't." "There's always another way. You just have to be willing to find it." Luca looked at her with something like wonder. "You really believe that?" "I have to. The alternative is giving up hope completely." "And you think I should what? Negotiate with people who want me dead?" "I think you should consider whether revenge is worth more than the chance to build something new." Luca was quiet for a long moment, watching Matteo chase a butterfly near the gazebo. What if I told you I was thinking about getting out? Nina's heart stopped. Out of what? All of it. The business, the violence, the endless cycle of blood and money. Why? Luca met her eyes, and Nina saw vulnerability there that took her breath away. Because for the first time in 3 years, I have something worth living for instead of just surviving. Nina's heart pounded as she stared into Luca's eyes. The weight of his words hung between them like a promise that could change everything. You can't mean that, she whispered. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Before Nina could respond, Matteo came running down the hill toward them, his cheeks flushed with excitement. He had a butterfly perched on his finger, a small orange and black monarch that seemed perfectly content to sit there. Look, Matteo said. Nina's breath caught. It was the first word he'd spoken in 8 months. Luca's face lit up with genuine joy. That's beautiful, buddy. You must be very gentle for it to trust you like that. Matteo beamed and carefully held out his finger. The butterfly sat there for another moment before spreading its wings and floating away. It knew I wouldn't hurt it, Matteo said quietly, watching it disappear into the roses. Nina had to bite her lip to keep from crying. Her little brother was finding his voice again, here in this beautiful place with this complicated man who somehow understood exactly what Matteo needed. Sometimes trust is like that, Luca said seriously. It takes time, but when someone shows you they're safe, your heart knows. Matteo nodded like this made perfect sense. Then he surprised them both by reaching for Luca's hand. Can we see the dinosaurs tomorrow? He asked. Luca looked at Nina, a question in his eyes. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Absolutely, Luca said. We'll make a whole day of it. That afternoon, while Matteo napped in the sunshine on a blanket in the garden, Nina and Luca sat on the back porch drinking iced tea. The peaceful scene felt almost normal, like they were a regular family enjoying a lazy Sunday. But peace never lasted long in Luca's world. Dom appeared at the porch steps, his expression grim. Boss, we need to talk. Luca's posture immediately shifted from relaxed to alert. What is it? The Morettis made a move. They grabbed Mrs. Chen. Nina's blood turned to ice. What? The old lady who watched your brother, Dom explained. They took her this morning, left a message. Luca was already standing. What message? Dom handed him a piece of paper. Luca read it, his jaw tightening with every word. What does it say? Nina asked, though she was afraid to know. They want to trade. Mrs. Chen for me. Nina felt sick. Mrs. Chen was an innocent old woman who'd never hurt anyone. She didn't deserve to be dragged into this nightmare. We have to save her, Nina said. We will. How? Luca's expression had gone cold and calculating, the dangerous man emerging. I'm going to end this, once and for all. You mean you're going to kill them? If necessary. Nina stood up, anger and fear warring in her chest. There has to be another way. Nina. No, listen to me. Nina grabbed his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. You said you wanted out of this life. You said you wanted to build something new, but the first time things get difficult, you're ready to go back to violence? This isn't about going back to anything. This is about protecting the people I love. The words hung in the air between them. Luca's eyes widened slightly, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. You love me? Nina whispered. Luca looked at her like she was the most beautiful and terrifying thing he'd ever seen. Yes. And Matteo? Like he was my own. Son. Nina's heart felt like it might burst, but along with the joy came crushing fear. Then don't throw your life away, she said. Don't throw our future away for revenge. It's not revenge. It's protection. It's both, and you know it. Dom cleared his throat uncomfortably. Boss, we need to move soon. They're expecting an answer by midnight. Luca nodded, but didn't take his eyes off Nina. Give me a minute. After Dom left, Luca cupped Nina's face in his hands. His palms were warm and slightly rough, and Nina found herself leaning into the touch. I can't lose you, he said quietly. Either of you. I won't survive it again. You won't lose us. We'll figure this out together. Together? That's what families do, right? They solve problems together. Something shifted in Luca's expression. Surprise, hope, wonder. Is that what we are? A family? Nina thought about Matteo's laughter this morning, about the butterfly trusting him enough to perch on his finger, about the way Luca looked when he talked about dinosaurs with a 7-year-old boy. Yes, she said. I think we are. That evening, while Matteo played with toys in the living room, Nina found Luca in his study. The room was all dark wood and leather, with books lining the walls and a massive desk that probably cost more than her car. Luca was on the phone, speaking in rapid Italian. His voice was hard, businesslike, but Nina caught enough words to understand he was making arrangements for some kind of meeting. When he hung up, Nina stepped into the room. What's the plan? I meet with Angelo Moretti tomorrow night, neutral ground. And then we see if your faith in negotiation is justified. Nina moved closer to the desk, studying Luca's face. You don't think it will work? I think Angelo Moretti is a man who only understands one language, and it's not the language of compromise. But you're willing to try, for us. Luca stood and walked around the desk until he was close enough to touch her. I'm willing to try anything if it means we get to have a future together. Nina's breath caught as he reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple gesture sent warmth spreading through her entire body. What kind of future? She asked softly. The kind where Matteo goes to school and makes friends and talks about dinosaurs until we're sick of hearing about them. Luca's voice was rough with emotion. The kind where you don't have to work 3 jobs just to pay rent. The kind where we wake up together every morning and go to sleep together every night. That sounds like a fairy tale. Maybe it is, but I want to try to make it real. Nina looked into his dark eyes and saw everything she'd been afraid to hope for. Love, security, a real family for Matteo, a future that stretched beyond just surviving day to day. I want that too, she whispered. Luca's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. Nina, yes? Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. His lips were warm and gentle at first, questioning. Nina answered by rising up on her toes and kissing him back with all the hope and fear and love that had been building inside her for days. The kiss deepened, becoming desperate and tender at the same time. Nina could taste the danger that followed Luca everywhere, but underneath it was something sweeter, the promise of safety, of belonging, of home. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Tomorrow night, Luca said, resting his forehead against hers, after I settle things with the Morettis, I want to ask you something important. What? I want to ask if you'll stay, permanently, you and Matteo. I want to ask if you'll let me take care of you both the way you deserve. Nina's eyes filled with tears. And what if I say yes? Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it. The next day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Nina tried to keep things normal for Matteo's sake, but she could feel the tension radiating from everyone in the house. Even Maria seemed on edge, fussing over meals no one had much appetite for. Luca spent most of the day making phone calls and meeting with Dom and the other security men. Nina caught glimpses of the businessman in him, calm, strategic, completely in control. But she also saw the way his jaw tightened when he thought no one was looking, the way his hand moved unconsciously to where his gun was hidden. As evening approached, Luca found Nina in the garden where she was pushing Matteo on a swing that hung from an old oak tree. "It's time," he said quietly. Nina's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice light for Matteo's sake. "Time for what?" "My meeting." Matteo stopped pumping his legs, suddenly alert to the tension between the adults. "Where are you going?" he asked Luca. "Just to talk to some people, buddy. I'll be back soon." "Promise?" Luca knelt down so he was eye level with Matteo. "I promise, and tomorrow we'll go see those dinosaurs at the museum, okay?" Matteo nodded, but Nina could see worry in his young face. Children were good at sensing when adults were scared, even when the adults tried to hide it. Luca stood and looked at Nina. There was so much he wanted to say. She could see it in his eyes. But Matteo was listening, and some things couldn't be said in front of a 7-year-old. "Be careful," Nina said simply. "Always." But as Nina watched him walk back toward the house, his shoulders straight and his stride confident, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching him walk into a trap. The waiting was agony. Nina tried to keep Matteo distracted with games and movies, but every sound made her jump. Every car that passed on the street outside made her heart race. Dom had stayed behind with several other guards, but Nina could tell they were all on edge. Phones rang constantly with updates from the team that had gone with Luca. Around 10 o'clock, Nina was reading to Matteo in his room when they heard shouting from downstairs, then gunshots. Nina's blood turned to ice. She grabbed Matteo and pulled him into the closet, just like Luca had shown her during their safety drill. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "No matter what you hear, stay quiet." More gunshots echoed through the house. Nina heard Dom shouting orders, heard the sound of breaking glass. Then footsteps on the stairs getting closer. Nina held Matteo tight and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. The footsteps stopped outside Matteo's room. The door opened slowly. "Nina?" a familiar voice called. "It's okay. It's me." "Luca." Nina nearly sobbed with relief as she pushed open the closet door. Luca stood in the doorway, his suit torn and dirty, a cut on his cheekbone. But he was alive. He was whole. "What happened?" Nina asked as Matteo launched himself into Luca's arms. Angelo Moretti decided negotiation wasn't his style after all. Luca held Matteo tight while his eyes met Nina's over the boy's head. He brought 20 men to what was supposed to be a peaceful meeting. And now he won't be bringing anyone anywhere ever again. Nina understood. The Moretti threat was over, permanently. "Mrs. Chen?" "Safe. Dom's team got her out before the shooting started." Relief flooded through Nina so powerfully she felt dizzy. It was over. The nightmare that had started with a simple lie in a diner was finally over. "What happens now?" she asked. Luca set Matteo down gently, then took Nina's hands in his. His were shaking slightly, the only sign that the evening had affected him at all. "Now I ask you that important question I mentioned yesterday. Here, now. Here, now, in front of the boy who's already part of my heart." Luca dropped to one knee, and Nina's breath caught. "I don't have a ring yet," he said, "and I know this is crazy, fast, and completely insane, but Nina Torres, will you marry me? Will you let me love you and protect you and build a life with you? Will you let me be a father to Matteo and maybe give him brothers and sisters someday?" Nina looked down at this powerful, dangerous, gentle man who was offering her everything she'd ever wanted but never dared to hope for. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes!" Matteo cheered and threw his arms around both of them, creating a tangle of limbs and laughter and tears. "Are you going to be my new dad?" Matteo asked Luca seriously. "If you'll have me," Luca said. "Will you teach me about dinosaurs and cars and how to be brave?" "Every day." "Then yes," Matteo said solemnly. "I choose you too." 6 months later, Nina wiped down the counter of her new cafe and smiled as she watched Matteo help customers at the register. He chattered happily about the daily specials, his selective mutism now just a memory. The cafe was everything she'd dreamed of, bright and welcoming, with comfortable chairs and the smell of fresh coffee. Luca had insisted on backing the business, but Nina ran at her way. She'd even hired Mrs. Chen as a part-time baker, which made everyone happy. The bell above the door chimed, and Nina looked up to see Luca walking in. Even after 6 months of marriage, the sight of him still made her heart skip. He'd traded his expensive suits for jeans and button-down shirts, though Nina suspected he still wore a gun under his jacket. Some habits died hard. "Hey, gorgeous," he said, leaning across the counter to kiss her. "Hey yourself, how was your meeting?" "Productive? The last of the Moretti assets have been transferred to the Victim Compensation Fund." Luca had been working with federal prosecutors to dismantle what remained of the Moretti organization. It was part of his deal to get out of the life completely, help clean up the mess, and they'd let him walk away. "So it's really over?" Nina asked. "It's really over." Matteo bounced over, his school backpack still on his shoulders. "Luca, guess what? Mrs. Rodriguez says I'm the best reader in 2nd grade." "That's amazing, buddy." Luca ruffled Matteo's dark hair. "I'm so proud of you." "And Nina said we could get a dog if I keep doing good in school." Luca raised an eyebrow at Nina. "Did she now?" "Don't look at me like that. You're the one who mentioned wanting a big dog to play fetch with." "I was thinking more like a German shepherd, for security." "We're getting a golden retriever," Nina said firmly, "for cuddles." "Can we get both?" Matteo asked hopefully. Luca and Nina looked at each other and started laughing. 6 months ago, Nina had been a struggling waitress afraid of losing her brother. Now she was married to a former Mafia boss, running her own business and negotiating about how many dogs they could fit in their mansion. Life was strange and wonderful and completely unpredictable. "Maybe we should start with one dog," Nina said. "See how it goes." "Fair enough," Luca agreed. He looked around the busy cafe where customers chatted over coffee and pastries. "I love seeing you like this." "Like what?" "Happy, in your element, building something that's entirely yours." Nina felt warmth spread through her chest. "It's ours, all of it. The cafe, the house, this crazy, beautiful life we're building." "Speaking of which," Luca said, reaching into his pocket, "I have something for you." He pulled out a small velvet box, and Nina's heart skipped. "Luca Romano, if you bought me another piece of expensive jewelry, open it." Nina opened the box and gasped. Inside was a simple silver locket, old-fashioned and elegant. "It was my grandmother's," Luca said softly. "She gave it to my mother, who was supposed to give it to Isabella. But Isabella died before—" He cleared his throat. "I want you to have it. I want it to be part of our family's story." Nina's eyes filled with tears as she lifted the locket from the box. It was beautiful, but more than that, it was a symbol. Luca was giving her a piece of his family's history, making her part of a legacy that went back generations. "Help me put it on?" Luca fastened the delicate chain around her neck, his fingers gentle at her nape. The locket settled perfectly against her heart. "I love you," Nina said, turning to face him. "I love you too, both of you, more than I ever thought possible." Matteo appeared beside them, looking up with bright, curious eyes. "What are you guys being mushy about now?" "Just appreciating how lucky we are," Nina said, pulling him into a hug. "Can we go home soon? I want to work on my dinosaur report." "Absolutely," Luca said. "But first, I have news." "Good news?" Nina asked. "The best. The adoption papers came through. Matteo, you're officially my son now, if you want to be." Matteo's face lit up like the 4th of July. "Really? Really, really? Really, really?" Matteo threw himself into Luca's arms with enough force to nearly knock him over. "I have a real dad now." "You always had a real dad," Luca said seriously. "Love makes families, not paperwork. But now it's official." Nina watched her husband hold her brother, their son, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. A year ago, she never could have imagined this life. A dangerous stranger in a diner had become her salvation, her partner, her home. Sometimes the best things came from the most unexpected places. Sometimes love really could conquer everything. As the afternoon sun streamed through the cafe windows, illuminating her small family, Nina touched the locket at her throat and smiled. She'd started this journey trying to protect the people she loved. She'd ended up finding a love worth protecting with everything she had. And that, Nina thought, was the most beautiful kind of story there was.